What's up, JEFusion fans? This is Philip and welcome back to another video. So this is part 2 of my video talking about Kamen Riders with multiple users. So if you missed that video, link is going to be down in the description. Now, to uh, cut to the chase, so we're going to focus only on the TV run of the show. So we're not going to include instances that happen in movies, spin-offs, novels, or what have you. So again, we're only focusing on the original TV run for each show. So now we are into the second half of the Heisei era, or the Neo Heisei Kamen Riders. So again, because part 1 is about the early Heisei Kamen Riders with multiple users, so link is down in the description for you guys to see that. So we're going to start with Kamen Rider Double. Now, unfortunately, I tried to do my research, but there really were no instances of Kamen Rider Double having multiple users, and well, there are basically two people using the rider system. They have to basically be combined to do that. So that doesn't really count. So uh, I guess in order to clarify this, we need to establish that uh, in order for a rider system to have multiple users, they should be used on separate occasions. So again, Kamen Rider Double does not count. And Kamen Rider Axel is a solo user rider, so he's also out of the question as well. So now we are skipping to Kamen Rider O's. Now, Kamen Rider O's at least had Kamen Rider Birth, and we have two prominent users for it, Shintaro Goto and Akira Date. Now, Akira Date eventually switches to the prototype version, which is called Proto Birth, but again, there was a time that they used or they alternated with the use of the Kamen Rider Birth system. So I guess at least an honorable mention. So Eiji Hino also becomes Kamen Rider Birth, at least in the movie, as far as I remember. But again, since we're focusing only on the TV run of the show, or only the TV story, so at least there were users of the birth system. Now, let's go to Kamen Rider Forza, and there was almost a moment when Kengo Utahoshi tried to transform into Kamen Rider Forza much later in the show, but his transformation was cancelled. Now, originally he was intended to be the user of the Forza driver, but because of his weak body, he cannot handle the transformation. Thus, he had to allow another person, in this case, Gentaro Kisaragi, to become Forze. So, Kengo's condition does become better at again in that later part, but he was interrupted by an enemy, so his transformation into Forze really didn't happen. So honorable mention, I guess. Now, Kamen Rider Meteor, on the other hand, was a solo user as well, so he doesn't count in this video. Now, moving on to Kamen Rider Wizard. So, I tried to look into things, but the Kamen Rider Mage doesn't count because it's not a multiple user system, it's a multiple rider system. Different people with different drivers with different powers. So, again, they're not really counted. The main riders, so Kamen Rider Wizard and Kamen Rider Beast, again, there were no alternate users for them. So everything else like happens in the movies, but the Kamen Rider White Wizard, again, there were technically multiple users, but again, it happens in the movie, so it doesn't actually count. So now we're going into Kamen Rider Gaim. Now, Kamen Rider Gaim originally was supposed to have more, or a different user. So before we had Kota becoming Kamen Rider Gaim, so it was supposed to be his friend Yuya, but before he even had the chance to transform into Gaim, so he ate a Helheim fruit and turned into an Invest that Kota, well, killed. So he never knew that it was actually his friend Yuya that he killed, but what can we do about that? Now, speaking of multiple uh, users, now I do specifically remember Kamen Rider Zangetsu Melon Energy version. So the Kureshima brothers used this same system at some point. Of course, uh, Mitsuzane betrayed his brother and left and took the uh, energy squash driver. So I forgot the name of that one, but yeah. And so so he pretended to be Kamen Rider Zangetsu Melon Energy before he went back, or before he became Kamen Rider Ryugen uh, Yomotsu Heguri Arms. So yeah, at least there's one prominently, or there's one rider system with at least two users at some point. Now, moving on, so for Kamen Rider Drive, it's uh, basically tough to uh, look at, because if I think about it, there was almost a time when Shinosuke wasn't actually the original user, so it would have been Chase, but Chase was Proto Drive, and Proto Drive is different from the actual Kamen Rider Drive. So, yeah, uh, Kiriko should Kiriko tried to transform into Kamen Rider Drive, but she wasn't compatible with the system, so her transformation didn't actually happen. So yeah, for Kamen Rider Mac, yeah, he also was a solo. So again, Kamen Rider Drive, no multiple users. Now, Kamen Rider Ghost kind of has, uh, I don't know, an interesting thing. So the character Onari, the loyal assistant to Takeru, at one point became an icon, and he became like a wandering soul. But at some point he possessed Alan's body, so Kamen Rider Necrom, and while inside Alan's body, he tried to transform into Kamen Rider Necrom, so I guess that counts. So it's again uh, in an interesting area, to say the least. So it's for me, I would consider an honorable mention, but not really. So again, it's a confusing scenario if you look at it closely. So now we go on to the next Kamen Rider, which is Kamen Rider Exade. Now, Kamen Rider Exade having multiple users, so I do remember Kamen Rider Chronos. Now, Kamen Rider Chronos was, of course, used by uh, Dan Masamune. So, Masamune Dan, so the father of Kuroto. So, Masamune was basically the primary user of Kamen Rider Chronos, but at one point, Taiga Hanaya got hold of the Kamen Rider Chronicle Gashat, and he was able to transform into Kamen Rider Chronos, making it his final power up form, instead of an actual power up for as Kamen Rider Snipe. So yeah, so at least there was one system that, or one rider power that was kind of shared, to say the least. So now let's go on to Kamen Rider build, because Kamen Rider build is in also in an interesting area. So we have Kamen Rider Evol with, of course, Evolt as the main user. Now, Evolt can possess other people. So in a couple of notable cases, so he possessed the bodies of Banjo and Sento. So while he was within their bodies, they also transformed into Kamen Rider Evil. However, he had different forms while using or while possessing other people. So, well, technically, I guess he is still Kamen Rider Evil while inside the body of Yuga Banjo. So his form was basically that of a mix of Kamen Rider Evil and Kamen Rider Claws. And of course, as uh, or well, in Sento's body, so he also had this rabbit uh, form. So again, it's uh, it's basically the same, Evil Driver, uh, just changing the Cobra into the dragon or the rabbit full bottles. So it it counts, but again, it's in that somewhat interesting area to say the least. So there was also another Kamen Rider build, which is made by Sento's father, or rather, Takumi, uh, Takumi's father. So yeah, there. So again, there were two Kamen Rider builds, but this was a different build driver. So uh, again, it wasn't a past version. It wasn't from one person to another. So it's a different copy of the belt. So that doesn't count really. So copies of the same belt don't really count. So at least the same belt, the same suit should be used by different people. So that's what makes it count, or that's what should make it count. Now, Kamen Rider Go. So uh, now this is also quite confusing if you look at it. So we're going to talk about Kamen Rider Was. So the original user of the Was driver was the White Was, who was loyal to Gates and wanted to destroy Sogo. Now, of course, there would come a point when the Black Was, so the Was that we've been following throughout the entire series, from start to end, so he would eventually become Kamen Rider Was. So is it I guess it still counts, because technically there are two versions of Was, so they're the same people but from two different timelines and dimensions. So I guess it kind of counts. And maybe honorable mention, so during the final stage, there was a red Was, so this one is loyal to Tsukuyomi, but again, still using the power of Kamen Rider Was. So yeah, at least there were two Wazes, so two copies of the same persons sharing the same belt. So I guess in that regard, that counts. So that's it for the later half of the Heisei Kamen Riders with multiple users. So if there's anything that you think I missed, I got wrong, or again, anything you think you disagree with, probably, but again, I'm kind of sticking to my guns for now, but you can tell me down in the comments below. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you did enjoy, please do leave a like, comment, share this video, subscribe, and don't forget that notification bell so you get the latest from JEFusion. Again, the link to part 1 is going to be down in the description, and again, make sure you're subscribed and your notifs are on, because next time we are going into the Heisei era. So stay tuned for that. Again, thanks for watching, and bye. See ya.